The wolf was never supposed to enter the Hall of Records. For 300 years, no living creature had crossed those ancient doors without the permission of the Alpha King. The records inside contained the oldest secrets of the Northern Kingdoms: births, deaths, bloodlines, betrayals, and names that had been deliberately erased from history. Yet just before dawn, while snow buried the palace gardens beneath a sheet of white, the great white wolf of Alpha King Rowan appeared inside the Forbidden Hall. Blood stained its silver-white fur. A torn page hung from its jaws, and written across that page was a name no one in the kingdom had heard spoken for 22 years. Elara. By sunrise, royal guards were searching every corridor. The scholars were terrified, and King Rowan was staring at a symbol beside the girl's name that had not been seen since the Night of Ashes. A silver wolf beneath a broken crown. Below, it were only 3 words. The lost blood returns. Far beyond the capital, in a tiny village surrounded by frozen forests, Elara knew nothing about the stolen page. She was kneeling in the snow beside an injured fox, carefully wrapping its bleeding leg with the last strip of cloth she owned. She had no royal name, no family, no wealth, no idea why wolves sometimes watched her from the trees. All her life, she had believed she had been abandoned because nobody wanted her. But deep inside the forbidden records, someone had written another truth. Elara had never been abandoned. She had been hidden. And the wolf that stole her name was about to lead the kingdom back to the secret someone had killed to protect. Far beyond the royal capital, where the mountains rose like dark walls against the northern sky, there was a small village called Briar Glen. It was the kind of place most kings forgot existed. The houses were built from rough timber and gray stone. Smoke curled from crooked chimneys every morning. Narrow paths disappeared beneath snow during winter, and the people learned early that survival depended more on helping one another than on waiting for help from the crown. At the far edge of the village stood a little cottage with a sagging wooden roof. That was where Elara lived. The cottage belonged to Mara, an elderly widow with silver hair, a sharp tongue, and a heart far softer than she allowed anyone to see. Elara had lived with her since childhood. No one knew exactly where the girl had come from. 22 years earlier, Mara had found an infant beside the northern forest road. The baby had been wrapped in a faded gray blanket. There had been no letter, no family crest, no explanation, only one strange detail. A thin silver thread had been sewn into the corner of the blanket in the shape of a wolf beneath a broken crown. Mara had never understood its meaning. She had simply taken the child home. And Elara had grown up believing that was all there was to her story. She was an orphan, a nobody, a girl without a past. But Elara never behaved like someone who believed she was better than anyone else. If a farmer's horse became sick, she came running. If an old woman needed medicine, Elara crossed the forest to find it. If children lost their way near the river, she searched until she brought them home. And if an injured animal appeared at her door, she never asked whether it was worth saving. That winter, the snow came early. For 3 days, the wind had screamed around the cottage walls. On the 4th evening, Elara stepped outside carrying a small basket of herbs. The forest was almost silent. Then she heard something. A low sound beneath the wind. A whimper. Elara stopped. She followed the sound toward the trees. The snow reached her knees. Then she saw the blood. A dark red trail stretched across the white ground. At the end of it stood a wolf. Not an ordinary wolf. This creature was enormous. Its fur was almost completely white, except for several old scars running across its shoulder. One of its back legs was caught inside an iron trap. Its golden eyes fixed upon Elara. Every sensible thought told her to turn around. Instead, she lowered the basket. "It's all right," she whispered. The wolf's lips lifted slightly. Its teeth appeared. Elara froze. But she didn't run. She slowly removed her gloves. Then she stepped closer. The wolf watched her. One step, then another. When she reached the trap, the animal growled so deeply that the snow seemed to vibrate. Elara swallowed. "I know it hurts." Her fingers moved toward the iron. The wolf's body tensed. Then something strange happened. It stopped fighting. Elara pulled at the trap. Nothing. She tried again. The iron did not move. Her palms began bleeding. She grabbed a fallen branch and pushed it between the jaws of the trap. With everything she had, she forced them apart. The wolf pulled its leg free. Elara fell backward into the snow. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the wolf limped toward her. Elara's breath caught. It lowered its massive head. Its nose touched her trembling hand. She could feel its warm breath against her fingers. Then it turned toward the forest. Before disappearing between the trees, the wolf looked back once. Elara did not know why, but she had the strange feeling that the creature was memorizing her face. That night, she used the last of her healing herbs to clean the blood from her hands. Mara noticed immediately. What happened? Elara smiled. I found an injured wolf. Mara's face changed. What kind of wolf? White. The old woman went completely still. Elara noticed. You know something? Mara looked toward the dark window.
No.
But her voice was too quiet. Far away, beneath the royal fortress, the same wolf was no longer in the forest. It was inside the palace. The guards never saw it enter. The ancient doors of the Hall of Records stood locked. Yet the wolf moved through the corridor as if it had walked there before. It stopped before an enormous iron door. Behind that door were the forbidden records. The wolf pressed its nose against the wood. Then it began scratching. The first guard heard the sound. By the time he reached the door, the lock had already broken. The wolf disappeared inside. Candles flickered. Dust filled the air. Hundreds of ancient books surrounded the animal. It walked directly toward one shelf, then another. Finally, it stopped before a black book bound in cracked leather. A silver seal covered its front. The wolf bit the seal. The metal snapped. A guard shouted. The creature tore through several pages before pulling one free. Then it ran. By the time the soldiers reached the hall, the wolf was gone. Only a torn page remained missing from the book. At sunrise, Alpha King Rowan stood over that page. He was 32 years old, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and feared throughout the northern kingdoms. But when the oldest scholar placed the parchment before him, the king's expression changed. At the top was a single name, Elara. Beside it was the silver wolf beneath the broken crown. Rowan stared at it. That symbol cannot exist. The scholar's hands trembled. It should not. Rowan looked up. What does it mean? The old man hesitated. Then he whispered the words written beneath the symbol. The lost blood returns. The room became silent, because everyone in that chamber knew what the words meant. The Moonblood family had supposedly died 22 years ago. And if the record was true, someone had survived. At that exact moment, far away in Briar Glen, Elara stepped outside her cottage. Fresh wolf tracks covered the snow. They began at her door. They crossed the garden. And beneath the final footprint lay a small piece of parchment. Elara picked it up. Her breath stopped. The silver wolf symbol was printed across it. The same symbol that had been sewn into her childhood blanket. Before she could understand what she was holding, horses thundered into the village. Royal banners appeared through the snow. And Mara whispered behind her, Elara, run. The villagers gathered silently as the royal riders entered Briar Glen. Nobody spoke. Children disappeared behind doors. Farmers lowered their eyes. At the front of the riders sat Captain Theron, commander of the King's Guard. He dismounted and approached Elara. Are you Elara? She tightened her grip around the parchment. Yes. We have orders to take you to the capital. Why? The captain did not answer. That frightened her more than anything else. Mara stepped forward. You cannot simply take her. Theron looked at the old woman. I was ordered to bring her alive. Elara noticed the strange emphasis. Alive. Her stomach tightened. She looked around the village. If she resisted, soldiers might search every home. Someone could be hurt. So she slowly handed the parchment to Mara. I'll go. Mara grabbed her arm. You don't know what waits for you. Elara looked into the woman's eyes. You do. Mara's face collapsed. For a moment, Elara thought the old woman would finally tell her everything. Instead, Mara whispered, Forgive me. Then Elara climbed onto the horse. The journey to the capital took 2 days. The white wolf appeared several times. It never approached the soldiers. It simply watched from the forest. When Elara looked toward the trees, she always found those golden eyes. Inside the royal fortress, King Rowan waited. Elara had expected a monster. Instead, she found a tired man standing beside a large stone window. Snow fell behind him. His crown rested on the table. For several seconds, neither spoke. Rowan studied her face. Not like a king examining a prisoner. Like someone trying to remember a face from a dream. Do you know why you're here?
No.
Do you know the symbol on this page? Elara shook her head. Rowan looked at her hands. There were small scars across her fingers. Healing scars. Animal scratches. Workers' hands. Not the hands of someone raised in a royal palace. Then the doors opened. The white wolf walked inside. Elara recognized it immediately. You. The wolf crossed the room. The guards raised their weapons. Rowan lifted one hand. Lower them. The wolf stopped before Elara. Then it lowered its head. Elara knelt. Her fingers touched the wound on its leg. It opened again. Rowan stared. Ashen had belonged to him for 12 years. The wolf trusted almost no one. It had survived battles, assassins, winter hunts, yet it was allowing a complete stranger to touch its injured leg. Elara carefully cleaned the wound. The entire court watched in silence. When she finished, Ashen rested its head against her shoulder. Rowan looked at the scholars. Explain. The oldest scholar opened the stolen page. 22 years ago, the Moonblood royal family disappeared during the Night of Ashes. Elara looked up. What does that have to do with me? The scholar pointed to her name. Everything. He explained that the Moonbloods had once ruled beside the royal family. Their bloodline was believed to have carried an ancient gift, not magic in the way children's stories described it, but a rare ability to sense the emotions of wolves and calm creatures driven by fear. They had been protectors of the northern forests, until someone betrayed them. The official records claimed every Moonblood had died. But Elara's name was not listed among the dead. It had been hidden. Rowan dismissed the court. But one man remained. Lord Malrec, the king's chief advisor. He was an elegant man with silver hair and cold eyes. He studied Elara carefully. Your Majesty, we cannot assume this girl is who the record claims. Rowan's expression hardened. You have doubts. I have concerns. Malrec looked at Elara. A person who suddenly appears after 22 years may be exactly what our enemies need. Elara felt anger rising. I didn't ask to come here. Malrec smiled faintly. That is what makes you dangerous. Rowan stepped between them. Elara was given a room inside the fortress. It was larger than the entire cottage she had shared with Mara. There was a fire, warm blankets, fresh clothes,
Food.
Yet she could not sleep. Everything felt wrong. She wandered the corridors at night. Ashen followed. The wolf eventually led her toward an abandoned tower. The door was sealed. Ashen scratched at a loose stone. Elara moved it. Behind it was a small silver pendant. She picked it up. The moment she saw the engraving, her heart began pounding. The symbol was identical to the one on her childhood blanket. She opened the pendant. Inside was a miniature painting. A young woman holding a baby. Elara stared. The woman's eyes were hers. Her hands began shaking. Beneath the painting was a sentence. If my daughter survives, she must never return to the capital. Elara read it twice. Then she heard footsteps. She turned. Lord Malrec stood in the doorway. His expression was no longer calm. His eyes were fixed on the pendant. And for the first time, Elara understood something terrifying. Malrec had not come to investigate her. He had been waiting for her. Malrec did not try to take the pendant. That would have made him look guilty. Instead, he simply smiled. You should return to your room. Elara held the pendant tightly. Who is she? Malrec's eyes remained on the painting. You don't know?
No.
Then perhaps you should ask the king. He walked away. Elara stood alone in the tower. Ashen growled softly. The next morning, rumors spread throughout the fortress. Elara had entered restricted rooms. She had stolen royal property. She was supposedly planning to claim the throne. By afternoon, people were whispering whenever she walked past. Rowan summoned her. He looked exhausted. I don't believe the rumors. Then why am I still here? Because I need proof. Elara looked at him. Proof of what? That you are not being used. She stared at the king. You think I want your throne?
No.
Then what do you think I want? Rowan paused. To know who you are. The answer disarmed her. For the first time, she saw something beneath the crown. Loneliness. Rowan told her about his father. The old king had died during the Night of Ashes. Rowan had been a child. He remembered smoke, screaming, his mother dragging him through a hidden passage, and Malrec standing beside the throne afterward, telling everyone the Moonbloods had betrayed the kingdom. Elara listened. Neither of them realized how long they remained there. Their relationship did not change suddenly. It grew through small moments. Elara began seeing Rowan without his crown. He visited the memorial hall alone. She saw him feeding an old injured hawk. He noticed that she always gave half her meals to animals. He started leaving small bowls of food outside her door for Ashen. Neither mentioned it, but something began forming between them. Meanwhile, Elara met Leora, a young archivist who secretly believed the official history was false. Together they searched the old records. They discovered that pages had been removed from dozens of books. Entire families had vanished from the records. Not just Moonbloods. Anyone connected to them. Leora found a hidden reference to an underground passage beneath the fortress. That night, Elara and Ashen followed it. The tunnel was older than the palace. The walls were covered in carvings of wolves. At the end stood a stone chamber. Inside were boxes filled with letters. One letter contained a name.
Celine.
Elara knew immediately. Her mother. The letter described the Night of Ashes. The Moonbloods had not betrayed the kingdom. They had been betrayed. Malrec's name appeared in the documents. Elara's hands went cold. But before she could read everything, guards discovered the chamber. The next morning, a forged letter was found inside Elara's room. It claimed she intended to poison Rowan. The court demanded her imprisonment. Rowan refused. But his advisors warned him that protecting Elara without evidence could trigger rebellion. Elara saw the conflict in his eyes. So she made the hardest choice of her life. I'll leave. Rowan stared at her.
No.
If I remain, they will use me against you. I can protect you. You shouldn't have to destroy your kingdom to protect me. Silence filled the room. Elara turned away. Rowan quietly said, I don't want you to leave.
She stopped.
For one moment, neither moved. Then she walked away. Rowan secretly arranged an escort to return her toward Briar Glen. But Malrec had already prepared his trap. Halfway through the mountains, several guards turned against the escort. Elara ran. Snow whipped across her face. She fell. Then Ashen appeared. The great white wolf drove the attackers back long enough for Elara to escape into the forest. Around Ashen's neck hung a leather pouch. Inside was the stolen page. But there was something else. A second fragment. Elara unfolded it. One name was written there.
Mara.
Elara stared. The old woman who had raised her. The woman who had always told her she was simply an orphan. The woman who had begged her to run. Elara looked toward Briar Glen. Smoke was rising beyond the trees. Her home was burning. Elara reached Briar Glen before nightfall. The village looked nothing like the place she remembered. Smoke drifted between the houses. Several roofs had collapsed. People carried blankets and broken furniture through the snow. For a moment, Elara stood frozen. Then she saw Mara. The old woman was gone. A neighbor rushed toward her. They took her. Elara's chest tightened.
Who?
Men from the capital. They were searching your house. Elara looked toward the burned cottage. She could have run. Instead, she started helping. She carried water. She found food. She treated burns. She wrapped children's hands. By midnight, the villagers had stopped looking at her like an orphan. They looked at her like someone they could follow. Ashen remained beside her. At dawn, Elara followed the tracks into the forest. The trail led to the Whispering Wood. Deep beneath the trees was an old stone sanctuary. Mara was there,
Alive.
barely conscious. Elara ran to her. Mara. The old woman's eyes opened. For 22 years, she had carried the secret alone. Now she finally told Elara everything. Her mother had been Queen Selene, the last Moonblood queen. On the night of the betrayal, Selene had placed her newborn daughter into Mara's arms. Take her. Those were the final words. Mara had escaped through the forest. Selene stayed behind. She knew she would not survive, but she had believed her daughter might. Elara cried silently, not because she wanted a crown, because she finally understood why Mara had always been afraid whenever wolves appeared near the cottage. Mara had been protecting her. All these years, Malrec had hunted them. Mara revealed that Selene had hidden the final proof beneath the tomb of the first Moonblood king. Only Elara could open it. Before they could leave, horses appeared. Malrec. He stepped into the sanctuary. His soldiers surrounded them. You were always going to lead me there, he told Elara. She understood. The entire escape had been another trap. Malrec had never needed to find the sanctuary. He had needed Elara to reveal its location. Elara looked at Mara, then at the villagers, then at Ashen. She knew what would happen if she resisted, so she stepped forward. Take me. Malrec smiled. Ashen growled. Elara looked at the wolf. Go. Ashen refused. Go. The wolf finally turned. It disappeared into the forest. Malrec's men took Elara. Hours later, Ashen reached the royal fortress. Blood covered its fur. Around its neck hung Elara's silver pendant. Rowan saw it. His face went pale. Ashen dropped the pendant at his feet. Attached to it was another piece of parchment. Rowan unfolded it. The handwriting belonged to Selene. It named Malrec as the architect of the Night of Ashes. But the final line was worse. If he ever takes my daughter alive, he will take her to the first tomb. Rowan looked toward the mountains. He understood. Malrec wasn't trying to kill Elara. He needed her. And whatever waited beneath that ancient tomb was something powerful enough to change the entire kingdom. The mountains grew colder with every mile. Malrec's soldiers led Elara through narrow paths carved between cliffs. She was exhausted. Her hands were bound, but something inside her had changed. For the first time in her life, she no longer wondered whether she mattered. She thought about Mara, the villagers, Rowan, Ashen, all the people who had trusted her before they knew her bloodline. Malrec believed blood made a person important. Elara had begun to understand that love did. The ancient tomb stood beneath a mountain. Its entrance was carved into black stone. Two enormous wolves guarded the doorway. Malrec pushed Elara forward. Open it. Elara placed her hand against the stone. Nothing happened. Then she remembered the pendant. She pressed it against the carving. The doors moved. A deep sound rolled through the mountain. Stone grinding against stone. The chamber opened. Inside were thousands of records. Names. Treaties. Bloodlines.
Testimonies.
And at the center stood an ancient crown. Malrec walked toward it. His eyes filled with greed. But Elara noticed something. The crown did not belong to the Moonbloods. It belonged to the kingdom itself. Beside it was the original royal record, the document that could prove who had ruled legitimately. Malrec reached for it. Elara moved first. She grabbed the record. Malrec struck the table. You don't understand what you're holding. I understand enough. He ordered his soldiers to seize her. Then he set the chamber on fire. Flames raced across the ancient shelves. Smoke filled the room. Elara could have escaped. Instead, she grabbed the records that could save the names of the dead. One box. Then another. The ceiling began collapsing. She stumbled. A beam crashed behind her. Then she heard a familiar sound.
A howl.
Ashen. Snow burst through the entrance. Behind the wolf came Rowan and his soldiers. Rowan ran into the burning chamber. He found Elara beneath a fallen beam. He lifted it with the help of two soldiers. She fell into his arms. For several seconds, neither spoke. Rowan held her as if afraid she would disappear again. Elara pressed her forehead against his shoulder. Then she whispered. Malrec escaped. Rowan looked toward the tunnel. The villain was already gone. They returned toward the capital, but the sky ahead was glowing red. At first Elara thought it was sunrise. Then Rowan stopped. Smoke rose above the horizon. The royal fortress was burning. Malrec had reached the capital first, and he had decided that if he could not erase the truth quietly, he would destroy the kingdom with it. The capital gates were closed. Malrec had taken control of the fortress. His soldiers stood on the walls. The royal banners had been replaced. Rowan's kingdom was divided, but something unexpected waited outside the gates.
People. Thousands of them.
Farmers from Briar Glen.
Healers.
Stable workers. Old families who had lost relatives during the Night of Ashes. Archivists. Travelers. People who had never stood inside a royal hall. People who had heard the truth. Elara looked at them. These were the people she had helped without expecting anything. Now, they had come for her. Rowan turned toward her. You don't have to do this. Elara looked at the fortress. Yes, I do. They entered through the great hall. Malrec stood beneath the throne. He looked almost peaceful. You should have stayed hidden. Elara walked forward. I did. She raised the ancient records. For 22 years. The hall became silent. Malrec tried to accuse her. He called her an imposter, a manipulator, a threat. But his words began falling apart. Leora entered carrying restored records. Mara arrived with villagers from Briar Glen. Families brought letters passed secretly from generation to generation. And then the final testimony of Queen Selene was read. The truth spread through the hall like fire. Malrec had arranged the purge. He had forged the records. He had erased names. He had hunted surviving Moonbloods. He had controlled the kingdom by keeping everyone afraid of a lie.
His face changed.
For the first time, the man who had controlled everyone else looked afraid. He ran toward the forbidden archive. Ashen followed. The wolf stopped him at the doorway. Malrec backed away. Behind Ashen stood Rowan. The king did not draw his sword. He didn't need to. Your story ends here. Malrec was arrested. The forbidden records were opened. Not destroyed. Not hidden. Opened. The kingdom finally learned the names of those who had been erased. Graves were restored. Families discovered the truth about lost relatives. The Night of Ashes was no longer a legend. It became history. Elara was offered the ancient Moonblood crown. She refused to rule through blood. Instead, she accepted her heritage without allowing it to define her. She remained beside Rowan. Their relationship changed slowly. There was no grand ceremony. No sudden declaration. Only quiet moments. Walking together beneath winter trees. Sharing meals. Caring for wounded animals. Standing beside the same memorial where Rowan had once mourned alone. Eventually, the kingdom began to heal. And Elara returned to Briar Glen. Her cottage had been rebuilt. Mara sat beside the fire. Children played outside. Animals once again appeared at Elara's door. One evening, snow began falling. Ashen rested beneath an old pine tree. Elara walked outside. She looked across the village. For years she had believed Briar Glen was proof that she had been forgotten. Now she understood something different. It had been home. Rowan arrived without guards. Without his crown. He stood beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The snow settled gently across the rooftops. Elara looked toward the forest. The same forest where she had once found a wounded wolf. The same forest where her entire life had changed. Ashen lifted his head, then slowly walked toward her. Elara knelt. The great white wolf placed its nose against her hand, exactly as it had done on that first winter night. She smiled. The stolen page had brought her name back into history. But the page had never made her important. Her blood had not made her worthy. The crown had not made her strong. It was every small act of kindness she had given when nobody was watching. Every wounded creature she had stopped to save. Every hungry child she had fed. Every frightened person she had refused to abandon. That was why Ashen had chosen her. That was why Rowan had trusted her. That was why the people had followed her. Elara had spent 22 years believing she had been hidden because she was unwanted. Now she finally knew the truth. She had been hidden because someone had loved her enough to sacrifice everything. And perhaps that was the greatest secret the Forbidden Records had ever contained. Not who Elara's parents were, not who deserved the crown, but the simple truth that sometimes the person history tries hardest to erase is the person who was always meant to change it. The wind moved softly through the trees. Snow covered the old tracks, and beneath the winter moon, the last Moonblood stood beside the wolf that had stolen her name from the darkness. For the first time in her life, Elara did not wonder where she belonged. She already knew. She belonged wherever someone was afraid and needed kindness, wherever the wounded needed a hand, wherever the forgotten needed someone to remember them. And as Rowan quietly took her hand beneath the falling snow, the kingdom behind them finally began to heal. The forbidden page had begun with a stolen name, but it ended with a home. And somewhere deep within the ancient forests, wolves raised their voices beneath the moon, not in mourning anymore, but in welcome.